Well, okay, so you just asked me to talk about permaculture principle number 7. It's a huge subject in itself, but it's design. So it's about design. It's beginning about how to think of how we arrange things strategically to create desired outcomes, but design from patterns to details. And when we look into nature, because nature's our teacher in permaculture, is we see patterns everywhere. And what we also realize is that those patterns sort of become like archetypes, that we see the same kind of patterning again and again and again. For example, how tributaries and little rivulets become a river. You can imagine that sort of branching pattern that we see at the beginning of a river, and then often, especially one with a big delta, and think of like the Nile Delta or something like that. And again, we have a single main, thoroughfare for the river, breaking down into lots and lots of different, again, branches. Think about trees. You very quickly can see how you see these patterns everywhere. The spider's web pattern, the wave pattern, the spiral pattern. These are kind of universal things. So also another way you can think about nature is things don't happen just as individual events. They happen as sequences, like seasons, and climate, weather patterns. So we learn how to coordinate. Sow our seeds in the spring and harvest in the autumn. That's about moving with patterns that we've observed. So we can see these things in all sorts of different examples, and we're just sort of having some fun here with our lovely mandala garden, which in itself is a pattern. We've got 20 raised beds. You can see them here, and we're treating each one ever so slightly differently so that we can observe differences and see what that can tell us. So between these 20 beds, half of them, the top half, have been only had animal manure in, and the bottom half have had animal manure and biochar in. And the left-hand side has been dug, and the right-hand side has not been dug. So we've created 4 different environments just by varying our pattern ever so slightly. And we're now planting the same sets of vegetables in each one of those quarters, and we're going to see what it's going to tell us. Is how much is the dig, no dig, or the biochar, no biochar? What does that tell us? And can we tell the differences in the crops? Do they taste better? Do they store longer? Will there be more worms in the soil? These are all observations that we can then make to start to see how these patterns pan out in reality. And of course, nature's always complex. Nature's always throwing up unique circumstances that we've never quite seen before. And so by seeing the underlying patterns, that's how we actually begin to make sense of nature's randomness. So here's a question to think about: is how do we make sense of complexity, ever-changing complexity that is the natural world? And the answer is we learn to see the patterns, and because within that certain things keep repeating, and that's what we're learning from all the time. The simplest pattern I think I always talk about in teaching is water always flows downhill. It might wobble about a bit, but it always ends up at the bottom. So that's a pattern, again, that we can predict, we can work with, we can channel water then, working with gravity, working with these observable effects to make it go where we want it to go, to do work, to nourish plants and, nourish whole ecosystems. So there you go, patterns to detail. It's a big one, and I normally spend a whole day even just beginning to look at these things on the permaculture course. So it's just fun to bring them alive here and see how we're playing with a pattern language here at Treflach Farm.